On-site examination involves challenges related to the operating systems that are being running on computers, as well as the network configuration. So typically when you deal with big companies and large organizations, you should be in touch with the system administrators, which typically are very, very helpful in assisting your on-site examination and evidence collection. So these are very helpful people, and you need to make sure that you include them in your briefings. One important type of challenge to expect that computers may contain intellectual property of a specific individual or organization that could be used for business purposes and various types of publication. So this may influence significantly the authorization and seizure process. Basically, this is a territory that you don't want to overstep. So there's lots of things that is very helpful to find out before you enter the actual procedure, and therefore you need to continue to brainstorm what kind of collection tools and how much people you need to be able to conduct a successful on-site examination. Of course, identification of the evidence largely depends on your experience and experience of the members of your team and your expertise. However, obviously you'd like to focus on any links and any evidence related to a crime and the victim and the crime and the perpetrator in criminal cases. And this is your chance to actively look for such information at the crime scene. Of course, also any printed manuals and boxes related to hardware and software can give hints of what hardware, software, and internet services might be installed or used. And oftentimes printed materials, handwritten notes, paper stickers attached to the computers are also collected at the same time as the actual equipment is collected. So when you identifying hardware, of course you need to have some basic knowledge about what kind of computers to expect, what kind of network configuration may exist at the location, and all sorts of storage media that could be also expected there. And again, system administrators in large organizations are very proud of their work, and they typically are very, very helpful and can teach you a lot about their networks, computer configurations, security policy, and other important information that will pave a successful way in your investigation. Also, many computer manufacturers and suppliers have websites with detailed pictures of their equipment and functional specifications that you can use in your preparation for evidence collection. So this is a summary for identifying digital evidence, but in the future we also discuss in detail triage at locations which would allow you to execute the correct steps in live system analysis. Documenting your steps and procedures is important, and of course one of the most important parts of your documentation is the maintenance of the chain of custody. And everybody who is involved in handling or examining the original evidence may be called to a witness stand to testify for cross-examination. Chain of custody, also known as continuity of possession, and it has to be established whenever evidence is presented in court as an exhibit. So investigators involved in the collection and transportation of evidence may be requested to testify in court about evidence collection and examination. So whenever possible, the chain of custody should be kept to a minimum. So you don't want to just hand this evidence to different hands without a clear intent of executing a certain procedure. This creates confusion and may cause a lot of questions from the opposing counsel. So to retain complete control of the evidence at all times, you really have to minimize the entries in the chain of custody specific to your pieces of evidence. So I'm giving you a few examples of chain of custody forms. So as we learn already, the copies of digital evidence are admitted by the courts. But of course, in order to be able to prove the authenticity and validity of your digital evidence copies, you have to preserve your secure hash or MD5 values, which you can compute during imaging of the original evidence. So also the target media must include a label that specifies the date and time, initials of the person who is making the copy, how the copy was made. You need to specify the software that you're using, the license that you have in possession of the software, and the version of the software. So there are different ways to image the drives, but typically a desktop machine is taken apart, and the individual drives are attached to a write block protecting hardware, which basically allows you to connect directly to the internal or external hard drives. You can control the power, and these devices protect the digital media, digital evidence, in our case, of course, from writing to them. So it guarantees at the hardware level that you use only read-only access to the devices which are your data sources. Later on in our laboratory exercise in this section of the course, we're going to practice with hash values, forensic hashes generated within autopsy digital forensics environment. But in general, the idea of MD5 and other secure hash algorithms is to be able to input information from the file regarding to its name, rather regardless to whatever the name of the file is, whatever the extension of the file is. It's just the idea is to open the file as a set of zeros and ones and be able to pass it through this algorithm and compute a message digest such as this one. Okay, and if you have another copy of the file on the same computer or on a different computer and it suddenly generates the same value, you can be sure that these two files are exactly the same. If another file present on the system generates a different digest result of this hash computation algorithm, then of course the files contain different information. So it's basically like a black box that takes some input and generates some output. And of course digital hash can be computed for a single file, a single program, or a partition on disk, or the entire disk space. A successful application of secure hash algorithms such as MD5 is that note the difference between these two sentences here, and the difference really is just one letter over here. Okay, so it's potentially the difference is 8 different bits that are encoding character H and character A, and that's the only difference in this type of input. However, the result of this difference between two characters only, or simply put just one character in the content of the file, generates a significant difference between the two resulting MD5 hashes. So it's not that difficult to spot a difference, and this is what we rely on when we deal with authenticating and keeping valid signatures or fingerprinting the digital evidence in our possession. I'd like to mention a few warnings about copying in general. On computers, two copies of the same file will be absolutely identical. So it could be that you're dealing with a lot of similar disk drives or thumb drives or some other types of media which are nearly identical or sometimes completely identical, and making copies of them will also take you on a path that it could be a little bit confusing. What is the copy? What is the original? Or could be multiple originals that look very much alike. So the key to success here is to keep your notes very precise and very clear about anything that could uniquely identify the sources of your evidence. So of course, if you're dealing with hardware, keeping track of serial numbers, photographing devices, and any other details. For instance, some of the hardware could have signs of little damage, bending or scratches, or some kind of unique marking that was made by a user. All this is very important, needs to be documented in a significant manner. Also, remember that documenting the crime scene is not just to aid your actual investigation and generate leads in your forensic searches, but also it's very important that based on your documentation you should be able to not just understand the evidence, but also be able to reconstruct a crime scene, including reconstructing it verbally, because this is what would be very convincing to whoever is listening to your testimony on the stand, to demonstrate your expertise and your competency as an investigator in the case.